The harsh whisper of wind carried dust through the empty streets of Palisade, Colorado, as Zephyrine Wallace clutched her meager belongings close to her chest, tears streaming silently down her face. The town council's verdict still rang in her ears. Exile. For practices unbecoming a proper lady, for dangerous ideas, for being too different. The year was 1876, and in a place like Palisade, difference was not merely discouraged, it was punishable. Zephyrine had never intended to cause trouble in the 3 years since she'd arrived in Palisade. Her father had been a traveling doctor who taught her everything he knew before consumption claimed him last winter. When she started tending to the sick with her father's medical tools and knowledge of herbs, the town doctor, Harold McManus, had been outraged. A woman practicing medicine was unheard of, unnatural, dangerous. The final straw came when she successfully saved little Tommy Ferguson from scarlet fever after McManus had given up on the boy. Instead of gratitude, she received accusations of witchcraft and consorting with the devil. Now, at 22 years old, she was being forced out with nothing but a small bag of clothes, her father's medical journal, and a handful of dried herbs. The April sun beat down on her back as she trudged away from the town, no destination in mind except away. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, indifferent to her plight. "You've got until sundown to be beyond the county line," Sheriff Miller had told her, not unkindly. "Don't make me come looking for you, Miss Wallace." Zephyrine had nodded, too numb to speak. Now, as she followed the dusty trail heading west, her throat burned with unshed tears and the unfairness of it all. Her father had taught her to help people, to use her mind and her skills. How could that be so wrong? The sound of hoofbeats behind her made her heart stutter with fear. Had the sheriff changed his mind? Was he coming to arrest her properly? Zephyrine quickened her pace, though she knew there was nowhere to hide on the open road. "Miss, hold up there, miss." The voice wasn't Sheriff Miller's. Zephyrine turned to see a man on horseback approaching at a canter. He pulled his mount to a stop a respectful distance away. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and a weathered face that had seen its share of hard living. The man couldn't have been more than 30, with deep-set eyes that held a surprising gentleness despite his rugged appearance. His dark hair curled beneath the brim of a worn cowboy hat, and a layer of stubble covered his strong jaw. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Dawson Yates. Couldn't help but notice you walking out of town with your belongings. Thought you might need some assistance." Zephyrine clutched her bag tighter. "I'm not looking for trouble, sir." "Neither am I," he replied with an easy smile. "Just seems a long walk for a lady on her own is all. I'm leaving Palisade, permanently." Her voice caught on the last word, betraying her emotion. "I gathered as much." Dawson Yates studied her face, taking in her red-rimmed eyes and determined stance. "Mind if I ask why?" Zephyrine hesitated. If this man was from around here, he might share the town's views, but something in his open gaze made her decide to be honest. "I've been exiled. The town council, Dr. McManus, and most of the respectable folk have decided I'm too different to stay. I treat the sick, you see, with medicine and herbs. A woman shouldn't know such things, apparently." To her surprise, Dawson didn't look shocked or disapproving. Instead, he let out a low whistle. "So you're that healer I've heard whispers about, the one who saved the Ferguson boy?" Zephyrine nodded warily. "Well now," Dawson said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Different is exactly what I need. I beg your pardon. My ranch is half a day's ride from here. Lost my usual hand who knew something about treating animals and injuries a month back. Been looking for someone with healing knowledge ever since." He approached slowly, as if she were a skittish colt. I can offer you honest work, a roof, and folks who don't mind different, at least until you decide where you want to go next." Zephyrine eyed him suspiciously. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know Palisade can be cruel to those who don't fit in their neat little boxes, and I know healing skills are precious out here, whether they come from a man or a woman." He gestured to his horse. "No obligation beyond getting you safely to my ranch. After that, you're free to stay or go as you please." Zephyrine weighed her options. Night would fall eventually, and she had nowhere to go. This stranger was offering shelter and work. Despite the warnings, her mind screamed about trusting unknown men. Something told her Dawson Yates wasn't lying. "My name is Zephyrine Wallace," she finally said. "People call me Zeph." "Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Wallace," he replied, offering his hand to help her onto the horse. "Folks just call me Dawson." She hesitated just a moment before accepting his help. His calloused hand was warm against hers as he boosted her onto his horse. As Dawson mounted behind her, leaving a respectful distance between their bodies, Zephyrine took one last look at Palisade. "I won't be missed there," she said softly. "Their loss," Dawson replied, urging his horse forward. "My gain." The rhythm of the horse beneath them settled into a steady pace as they headed west. The vast Colorado landscape stretched out before them, wild and unforgiving but somehow filled with more promise than the town she'd left behind. "My ranch isn't much to look at," Dawson said after they'd ridden in comfortable silence for a while, "but it's good land. I run cattle mostly, some horses. Got a small crew, just 3 other hands and a cook who comes up from the valley 3 days a week. And they won't mind. Someone like me." Zephyrine asked. Dawson chuckled. "Madam, one of my hands is a freed slave who can recite Shakespeare while breaking the wildest bronc you've ever seen. Another is half Ute and doesn't speak more than 10 words a day unless he's singing, which he does beautifully. The third is an old-timer who lost an arm in the war but can still rope a calf faster than most men with 2. And my cook is a Chinese fella who fought with the Union and makes the best sourdough this side of the Mississippi. Different is all we know." For the first time that day, Zephyrine felt her lips curve into a genuine smile. "Sounds like an interesting place." "Never dull," Dawson agreed. "If you don't mind my asking, where did you learn your healing arts?" "My father was a doctor," she explained. "We traveled a lot when I was growing up. He believed in teaching me everything he knew, regardless of what society thought appropriate for a young lady. After the war, we settled in Denver for a while, but then he got restless again. We ended up in Palisade 3 years ago. When he died last winter, I kept practicing what he taught me." "I'm sorry about your father," Dawson said quietly. "Thank you." Zephyrine swallowed hard. "He would be disappointed to see me run out of town like this." "I disagree," Dawson said. "Sounds like he raised you to stand by your convictions. That's exactly what you did." The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon when Dawson pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a green valley ahead. "That's it. The Crooked Y. Not much, but it's home." As they drew closer, Zephyrine could make out a modest main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals filled with horses. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and a creek wound its way through the property. It was beautiful in its rustic simplicity, so different from the rigid order of Palisade. A tall black man with broad shoulders emerged from the barn as they approached, followed by a younger man with distinctive Native American features. Both looked curiously at Zephyrine as Dawson brought the horse to a stop in the yard. "Boys," Dawson called out, dismounting and reaching up to help Zephyrine down. "This here is Miss Zephyrine Wallace. She's going to be staying with us for a spell." Miss Wallace, this is Marcus Johnson and Thomas Running Elk. Madam, Marcus said, touching his hat respectfully. Thomas simply nodded, his dark eyes curious but kind. Miss Wallace is a healer, Dawson explained. Knows medicine and herbs. Thought she might help us out, seeing as Jenkins is gone and the nearest doctor is a 2-day ride. A healer? Marcus's face lit up. Lord knows we need one. Thomas here sliced his hand open last week, and the best I could do was pour whiskey on it and hope. I'd be happy to take a look, Zephyrine offered, finding her voice. Later, Dawson said. Right now, I expect Miss Wallace could use some rest and a hot meal. Marcus, where's old Pete? Fixing the fence in the north pasture. Should be back by supper. And Lie's coming tomorrow. Yep. Said he'd bring extra supplies since we have that cattle drive coming up. Dawson nodded, then turned to Zephyrine. I'll show you where you can stay. He led her to a small cabin a short distance from the main house. This was meant to be for a foreman, but I never hired one. Been using it for storage, but we cleared it out when Jenkins was here. It's not fancy, but it's private. The cabin was simple, one room with a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest of drawers, and a pot-bellied stove. A window looked out over the valley, and the afternoon sunlight streamed in, warming the wooden floor. There's a washroom out back, Dawson continued, and you're welcome to take meals with us in the main house. The boys and I usually eat together. Zephyrine stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her life had taken. This morning, she'd awakened in her small room behind the apothecary shop where she'd worked, only to be dragged before the town council. Now, she was miles away on a cattle ranch, surrounded by strangers who didn't seem to care that she was a woman who practiced medicine. Mr. Yates, she began, turning to face him. Dawson, he corrected gently. Dawson. His name felt strange on her tongue. I don't know how to thank you for this kindness. No need for thanks, he replied, his voice gruff. We all need a helping hand sometimes. Rest now. Supper's at sunset. After he left, Zephyrine sank onto the bed, letting the events of the day wash over her. Tears came then, not of despair but of relief. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she had survived today. And for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope for her future. The sun was just beginning to set when a knock sounded at her door. Zephyrine had washed her face in the basin, changed into her cleanest dress, and repinned her long auburn hair. Miss Wallace, it was Marcus. Supper's ready if you're feeling up to joining us. She opened the door with a smile. I'm quite hungry, actually. Marcus led her to the main house, a comfortable structure with a large central room that served as both kitchen and dining area. A long wooden table dominated the space, already set with mismatched plates and cups. A pot of something that smelled delicious bubbled on the large cast iron stove. Dawson was there, freshly washed with his hair still damp. He'd changed into a clean shirt, and without his hat, Zephyrine noticed his hair was a rich dark brown with hints of auburn when the light caught it. Thomas sat quietly at the table, and an older man with one arm and a weathered face had joined them. Miss Wallace, this is old Pete, Dawson introduced. Pete, this is Miss Wallace, the healer I mentioned. Madam, Pete said with a nod. Here you got run out of Palisade. Bunch of narrow-minded fools over there if you ask me. Pete, Dawson warned, but Zephyrine laughed. You'll get no argument from me, sir. The meal was simple but satisfying, a hearty stew with fresh bread. The men were surprisingly polite, their rough edges softened in her presence. They ate hungrily but spoke with consideration, including her in their conversation without making her feel like an oddity. Miss Wallace saved a boy from scarlet fever after the town doctor gave up, Dawson told them as they ate. That's what got her exiled. Sounds like the town lost a good healer, Marcus commented. Their foolishness, our fortune. You said you know herbs, Thomas asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was deep and melodious. Zephyrine nodded. My father taught me traditional medicine, but he also learned from many cultures during his travels, including from native healers. Thomas's eyes lit with interest. My grandmother was a medicine woman. I know some plants, too. Perhaps we could exchange knowledge, she suggested. I'd like that. After the meal, Zephyrine insisted on helping with the dishes despite Dawson's protests. As they worked side by side, she studied him covertly. In the warm light of the oil lamps, his features were less harsh. There was a kindness in his eyes that belied his rugged appearance. Thank you, she said quietly as they finished, for everything. You're welcome, he replied, looking a bit uncomfortable with her gratitude. I meant what I said earlier. Different is what we need here. All of us have stories, reasons we ended up at the crooked Y instead of somewhere more conventional. What's yours? She asked boldly. Dawson paused, his hands stilling on the dish he was drying. That's a story for another time, he said finally. But I will tell you I understand what it's like when a town decides you don't belong. Before she could press further, Marcus called from outside that one of the horses seemed to be colicking. Dawson excused himself quickly, leaving Zephyrine with more questions than answers about the mysterious rancher who had rescued her. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Zephyrine quickly found her place at the Crooked Y, establishing a small infirmary in a corner of the barn where she could treat minor injuries and ailments. She organized her herbs and the medical supplies Dawson had purchased for her on a trip to the trading post. Thomas showed her local plants with healing properties, and together they created a small garden behind her cabin. Lai, the cook, arrived as promised and took an immediate liking to Zephyrine. A small, wiry man with intelligent eyes and a ready smile, he had indeed fought in the war and had fascinating stories about his experiences. He taught her to make his famous sourdough and didn't mind when she hovered near the kitchen, curious about the unfamiliar spices he used. Dawson was often busy with ranch work, but Zephyrine noticed how he made time each day to check on her, ensuring she had everything she needed. Their conversations were brief but increasingly comfortable, and she found herself looking forward to these moments. One evening, about 10 days after her arrival, Zephyrine was grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle on her cabin's small porch when Dawson appeared, leading his horse. "Evening, Miss Wallace," he called. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. And please call me Zeph." "Everyone else does." "Zeph," he repeated as if testing the name. "It suits you, unusual but strong." "My mother chose it," she explained. She loved mythology. Zephyrus was the Greek god of the west wind. "And here you are in the west," Dawson said with a smile. "Seems fitting." "I suppose it is." She set aside her work. "Would you like some tea? Thomas showed me a local plant that makes a wonderful brew." Dawson hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Inside, Zephyrine busied herself preparing the tea while Dawson removed his hat and sat at the small table, looking somewhat out of place in the cozy cabin. "The cattle drive starts next week," he said as she handed him a steaming cup. "I'll be taking most of the men with me to Pueblo." "We'll be gone about 2 weeks." "Oh," Zephyrine tried to hide her disappointment. "I see. Old Pete will stay behind. His arm makes the long drives difficult, and Lai will be here 3 days a week as usual." He paused. "Will you be all right?" "Of course," she said quickly. "I've been alone before." "I know you're capable," Dawson said. "That's not what I meant, I just—" He trailed off, taking a sip of tea. "You're concerned I might leave while you're gone," Zephyrine guessed. Dawson looked up, his eyes meeting hers directly. "The thought had crossed my mind." "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. And truthfully, I've found more acceptance here in these few days than I did in 3 years in Palisade. Relief visibly crossed his features. Good, that's good. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their tea. Marcus mentioned you were putting together a medical kit for the drive, Dawson finally said. Yes. Nothing elaborate, just bandages, salves, and some tinctures for common ailments. The men will be far from help if anything happens. That's thoughtful of you. It's the least I can do after all you've done for me. Dawson looked uncomfortable at her gratitude, as he always did. It's mutually beneficial. You needed a place, and we needed someone with your skills. Zephyrine studied him over the rim of her cup. Someday, Mr. Yates, you'll have to explain why you're so uncomfortable accepting thanks. A shadow passed over his face. Not much to explain. Just don't see the need for gratitude when I'm doing what anyone decent would do. Not anyone, she corrected gently. Not the people of Palisade. Not most people I've met in my travels. Dawson shifted in his seat, clearly wanting to change the subject. Tell me about your father. He sounds like he was an unusual man. Zephyrine allowed the diversion, sensing his discomfort. He was brilliant, compassionate, restless. After my mother died when I was 8, it was just the two of us traveling across the country. He could have had a prestigious practice in Boston or New York, but he preferred helping those who had no access to medical care. And he taught you everything. Everything he could, she confirmed. He said talent shouldn't be wasted because of something as arbitrary as gender. He believed I had a gift for healing. He was right, Dawson said softly. Zephyrine felt warmth creep into her cheeks at the simple compliment. What about your family? She asked. Dawson's expression closed off slightly. Not much to tell. Father was a rancher in Texas. Mother died young. Left home at 16, worked various ranches, saved enough to buy this place 5 years ago. And Palisade, she pressed. You mentioned understanding what it's like when a town decides you don't belong. Dawson stared into his tea for a long moment. That's a story that requires more than tea, he finally said, rising. Thank you for the drink, Zeph. I should get back. Early start tomorrow. As he reached the door, he paused. If you need anything while I'm gone, Pete knows where everything is. And Zeph, he turned, his expression suddenly vulnerable. I'm glad you're staying. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Zephyrine with the distinct feeling that Dawson Yates had as many secrets as she had herbs in her collection. The day of the cattle drive arrived, bringing a flurry of activity to the ranch. Zephyrine rose before dawn to help Lai prepare food for the men's journey. The ranch hands were in high spirits, excited for the change of pace despite the hard work ahead. She found Dawson by the corrals, checking saddles and giving last-minute instructions to Marcus. When he saw her approach with the medical kit she'd prepared, his face softened into a smile that made her heart skip. Here, she said, handing him the carefully packed satchel. Everything's labeled with instructions. The green salve is for cuts, the yellow for burns. The brown bottle has laudanum. Use it sparingly for severe pain only. And the Zeph, Dawson interrupted gently, taking the bag. Thank you. I'm sure it's all perfect. I just want to make sure you're prepared, she said, suddenly feeling foolish for her detailed explanations. We are, thanks to you. He hesitated, then added, I'll miss our evening talks. The simple admission caught her off guard. Over the past weeks, they'd fallen into a pattern of sharing tea in the evenings, talking about the day's events, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. She'd grown to look forward to these moments more than she cared to admit. I'll miss them too, she replied honestly. Dawson looked as if he wanted to say more, but Marcus called that they were ready to move out. With a tip of his hat, Dawson mounted his horse and joined the others, leading the small herd of cattle away from the ranch. Zephyrine watched until they disappeared from sight, an unexpected emptiness settling in her chest. The first week without Dawson and most of the hands passed slowly. Zephyrine kept busy helping Pete with ranch chores, tending her growing herb garden and organizing her medical supplies. On the days Lai came to cook, she enjoyed his company and continued learning his recipes. One evening, as she and Pete ate supper together, the old rancher broke his usual taciturn manner. "Never seen the boss take to someone the way he's taken to you," he said bluntly. Zephyrine nearly choked on her stew. "I beg your pardon," Pete chuckled. "Don't play coy, miss. Dawson's a good man but keeps to himself. Since you arrived, he's different, smiles more, even caught him whistling last week. We're friends," she said carefully. "He's been kind to me, MMHMM." Pete didn't sound convinced. Known Dawson 5 years. Never once saw him be friends with a woman before, especially not one pretty as you. Zephyrine felt her face grow hot. "Mr. Yates has been a perfect gentleman. Course he has, that's who he is." Pete set down his spoon. "You know why he took you in that day? He said he needed someone with medical knowledge. That's part of it. But Dawson has a soft spot for folks who have been wronged. Comes from his own experience." Pete hesitated. "Not my place to tell his story, but you should know Dawson understands exile better than most." He mentioned something about that, but wouldn't elaborate. Pete nodded. "He'll tell you when he's ready. Just know there's a reason he built this place the way he has, with folks others might turn away." The conversation left Zephyrine with even more questions about Dawson Yates, and a growing awareness of her own feelings for the rancher that went beyond gratitude. The second week brought unexpected trouble. A spring storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing driving rain and fierce winds that lasted for days. Zephyrine and Pete worked tirelessly to secure loose items around the ranch and ensure the remaining animals were safely sheltered. On the third night of the storm, as thunder crashed overhead, a pounding at her door startled Zephyrine from sleep. She lit a lamp to find Pete standing there, soaking wet and grim-faced. "Roof's leaking bad in the barn," he shouted over the howling wind. "Got 2 new foals in there that can't get wet and cold." Zephyrine quickly dressed and followed Pete into the tempest. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind threatened to knock them off their feet. Inside the barn, water poured through several spots in the roof, creating puddles on the floor. The nervous horses nickered in distress. "We need to move the mares and foals to the tack room," Pete instructed. "It's the only place that's staying dry." For hours, they worked to relocate animals and place buckets under the worst leaks. Zephyrine's hands were raw and her muscles ached, but she never complained. This was her home now too, and she would do whatever was necessary to protect it. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a mess of mud and debris. Zephyrine stood in the yard, surveying the damage. A section of fencing was down, branches littered the ground, and the garden she'd worked so hard on was partially washed away. "Could have been worse," Pete said, joining her. "No animals lost, building still standing." "We'll need to repair that roof properly," Zephyrine noted, thinking aloud. Pete raised an eyebrow. "I mean, you'll need to," she began, then stopped. "No, I meant we. I live here now, Pete. I want to help." The old rancher's weathered face creased in a smile. "Reckon Dawson will be mighty pleased to hear that." Over the next few days, Zephyrine and Pete worked side by side to clean up after the storm. Lai arrived with supplies and stayed to help, his usual 3-day visit extending to nearly a week. Together, the 3 of them managed to repair the worst of the damage before Dawson and the others returned. It was mid-afternoon when Zephyrine, perched on the barn roof helping Pete replace damaged shingles, heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. She looked up to see riders approaching, dust rising behind them. "They're back," she called to Pete, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "Right on time," Pete said with a knowing smile. "Better go welcome them properly." Zephyrine climbed down carefully, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She was wearing an old pair of men's trousers that Pete had lent her for the repair work. Her hair was tied back in a simple braid, and she knew there was dirt on her face. She hesitated, wondering if she should change, then decided against it. This was who she was now: practical, hardworking, and unafraid to get her hands dirty. Dawson was the first to ride into the yard. He looked tired, with several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw, but his eyes lit up when they found her. He dismounted quickly and strode toward her, removing his hat. "Zeph," he said, his voice warm with relief. "You're still here." "Of course I am," she replied. "Where else would I be?" His gaze traveled over her, taking in the trousers and her work-roughened hands. "What happened?" "Storm came through," she explained. "Nothing we couldn't handle, but there was some damage. Pete and I have been making repairs." "You've been fixing the barn roof?" Dawson asked, sounding both impressed and concerned. "Someone had to," she said simply. "Pete's arm makes it difficult for him to do certain tasks alone." Dawson shook his head in wonder. "You continue to surprise me, Zephyrine Wallace." Something in the way he said her name made her heart flutter. "How was the drive?" she asked, changing the subject. "Successful. Got a good price for the herd." He stepped closer. "I missed our talks." "I missed them too," she admitted softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment the bustling activity around them seemed to fade away. Then Marcus called for Dawson's help with the horses, breaking the spell. "I should go," Dawson said reluctantly. "But later, tea," Zephyrine smiled. "I'll have it ready." True to his word, Dawson appeared at her cabin that evening after the men had settled in and the day's work was done. He'd bathed and shaved and changed into clean clothes. Zephyrine had done the same, abandoning Pete's trousers for one of her simpler dresses. "You look nice," Dawson said as she invited him in. "Not that you didn't before. I mean, thank you," she interrupted his fumbling, amused by his awkwardness. "You clean up well yourself." They settled with their tea, and Dawson filled her in on the details of the cattle drive. It had gone smoothly, though one of the hands had suffered a minor injury that her medical kit had helped treat. "Your supplies were a godsend," he told her. "Marcus said you're a better doctor than any he's ever known." "Hardly a doctor," she demurred. "Just someone with knowledge passed down." "Which is what most doctors are," Dawson pointed out. "Just with fancier papers and more arrogance, in my experience." They laughed together, and Zephyrine marveled at how comfortable she felt in his presence. When had this man, who had been a stranger just weeks ago, become someone whose company she so thoroughly enjoyed? "Pete tells me there was quite a storm while we were gone," Dawson said, his expression growing serious. "He said you worked through the night to save the foals and secure the barn." "It needed to be done," she said simply. "Most women would have stayed in their cabins and waited for help." "I'm not most women," Zephyrine replied, "as you well know." "No," Dawson agreed, his eyes warm. "You certainly are not." He set down his cup. "Pete also mentioned you referred to the Crooked Y as your home." Zephyrine felt her cheeks warm. "I hope that wasn't presumptuous." "Not at all," Dawson assured her quickly. "I'm glad you feel that way. I want you to stay, Zeph, permanently if you're willing." Her heart leaped, but she forced herself to remain calm. As the ranch healer, Dawson hesitated, seeming to wrestle with something. "Yes, as our healer, but also—" When he didn't continue, Zephyrine prompted gently, "Also what, Dawson?" "Also as someone I've come to care for," he finally said, his voice low. "More than I expected, more than might be proper given the circumstances." Zephyrine's breath caught. I don't much care for what's proper, she reminded him. If I did, I wouldn't be here. No, I suppose you wouldn't, he agreed with a small smile. Zeph, I don't want to presume anything. You came here seeking safety, not complications. Is that what you are, a complication? She asked softly. I could be. His eyes held her steadily. My life hasn't been simple, Zeph. There are things about me you don't know. Then tell me, she urged. Pete mentioned you understand exile better than most. Dawson was quiet for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. I told you I left Texas when I was 16. What I didn't tell you was that I didn't leave voluntarily. What happened? She asked gently. My father was a hard man, Dawson began, his voice controlled. Respected in the community, a pillar of the church, but behind closed doors. He was cruel, especially after my mother died. I worked his ranch from the time I could walk, never good enough, never measuring up. He paused, taking a breath. When I was 16, I caught him beating one of our ranch hands, a Mexican boy not much older than me, for a mistake that wasn't even his fault. I intervened. We fought. I won. His jaw tightened at the memory. The town might have forgiven that, but what came after couldn't be overlooked. What happened? Zephyrine asked again, softer this time. I refused to hide anymore. I told the truth about my father, about the bruises my mother had worn until her death, about the workers he'd mistreated for years. No one wanted to hear it. A son turning against his father, defending foreigners and servants, questioning a respected man's authority. It was unforgivable. So they exiled you, she concluded. They gave me a choice: recant and beg forgiveness, or leave and never return. I chose to leave. Dawson's eyes held a distant pain. I wandered for years, working ranches across the West, learning from men better than my father. Eventually, I saved enough to buy this place. And you built it as a haven for others who didn't fit in, Zephyrine said, understanding dawning. Everyone here has a story, Dawson confirmed. Marcus was a freeman who could read and write when most black men couldn't. It made white employers uncomfortable. Thomas's mother was Ute, his father white. Neither community fully accepted him. Pete lost more than his arm in the war. He lost his faith in humanity. And Lai. He smiled slightly. Lai just likes to cook for people who appreciate good food. And now me, Zephyrine said softly. The woman who dared to heal. Now you, Dawson agreed. When I saw you walking away from Palisade that day, I recognized something in you. The same determination I had at 16. The refusal to be something you're not, just to make others comfortable. Different, she murmured. Exactly. His eyes held hers. Different is what I've always needed, Zeph. What all of us here need. The question is, are you willing to stay, not just as our healer, but as a permanent part of whatever we're building here? Zephyrine understood what he was really asking. This wasn't just about employment or friendship anymore. Are you courting me, Dawson Yates? A slow smile spread across his face. I believe I am, if you'll allow it. People will talk, she warned, though her heart was singing. The exiled woman living with the mysterious rancher and his unconventional crew. Let them, Dawson said firmly. We've both survived worse than gossip. Zephyrine studied him for a long moment. This man who had saved her when she needed saving, who had created a place where differences were celebrated rather than punished. Who looked at her now not with pity or judgment, but with admiration and something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken. Yes, she said finally. I'll stay. And yes, you may court me, though I warn you I'm likely to be a most improper lady. Dawson's laugh was rich and genuine. I would expect nothing less. Spring gave way to summer on the Crooked Y, and Zephyrine bloomed like the wildflowers that carpeted the nearby meadows. Her healing practice expanded beyond the ranch as word spread of her skills. Farmers and ranchers from outlying areas began to seek her out, bringing injured children, sick spouses, and ailing livestock. Dawson built her a proper infirmary adjacent to her cabin, stocked with supplies ordered from Denver. Their courtship progressed with the measured pace of two people who had learned caution from life's harder lessons. Dawson was unfailingly respectful, never pushing beyond what propriety allowed, though the heat in his eyes when they were alone told Zephyrine his restraint cost him. For her part, Zephyrine found herself falling deeper in love with this complex man who led with quiet authority, who treated his workers as equals, who could gentle the wildest horse with patient hands, and who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever seen. By midsummer, their evening talks had become the highlight of both their days. Sometimes they discussed ranch business or Zephyrine's patience. Other times they shared stories of their pasts or dreams for the future. Occasionally they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. It was on such an evening, as they sat on the porch of the main house, that Dawson finally took her hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. He smiled. "Perhaps, but necessary." He shifted to face her more directly. "Zeph, these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted softly. "I know our arrangement is unconventional, you living here, us courting without the usual supervision of family or community." He hesitated. "People might question your reputation." Zephyrine laughed lightly. "Dawson, I was exiled from a town for being unconventional. I rather think my reputation is beyond salvaging in polite society. Nevertheless," he continued seriously, "I want to do right by you, to make clear my intentions." Her heart began to beat faster. "And what are your intentions, Mr. Yates?" Dawson swallowed visibly, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. When he opened his hand, a simple gold ring rested on his palm. It was delicate but sturdy, with a small pearl nestled in the center. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing of hers I took when I left Texas. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for." He met her eyes. "Waiting for you, though I didn't know it." Zephyrine felt tears prick her eyes. "Dawson." "I love you, Zephyrine Wallace," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Your strength, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to be anything less than who you are. I love that you can stitch a wound without flinching and still cry over a newborn foal. I love that you see the good in people others might dismiss." He took a deep breath. "I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards, but I think both of us stopped living by convention some time ago. Will you marry me, Zeph? Make this place truly your home, and me the happiest man in Colorado territory." Zephyrine's heart felt too full for her chest. 6 months ago, she had been exiled from Palisade with nothing but her father's medical journal and a handful of herbs. Now she was being offered a future brighter than any she could have imagined. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "Yes, Dawson, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. Then, with exquisite tenderness, he cradled her face in his calloused hands and kissed her for the first time. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, but quickly deepened into something that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Dawson rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I found you on the road to Palisade," he admitted. "Why did you wait so long?" she asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Because you deserve to be sure," he said simply. To choose me for the right reasons, not out of gratitude or necessity. I love you, Zephyrine said, the words coming easily now that they had been freed. Not out of gratitude, though I am grateful. Not out of necessity, though I do need you. I love you because you truly saw me when others looked away, because you value different instead of fearing it. Dawson's smile was radiant. Then it seems we're perfectly matched, you and I. News of their engagement spread quickly among the small ranch community. Marcus offered congratulations with a knowing smile, as if he had predicted this outcome all along. Thomas, in his quiet way, presented Zephyrine with a beautiful dream catcher for their home. Old Pete gruffly declared it was about time, while Lai promised to prepare a feast for the wedding that would be remembered for years. They decided on a small ceremony at the ranch, to be held in the autumn when the aspen trees turned gold. Zephyrine wrote to her father's sister in Boston, her only living relative, though she held little hope the proper Eastern lady would approve of her niece's unconventional life choices. To her surprise, a letter arrived 3 weeks later, expressing not only approval but delight. Your father would be proud, her aunt wrote. He always hoped you would find someone who valued your mind as much as your heart. From your description, this Mr. Yates sounds like such a man. As summer waned, Zephyrine and Dawson fell into a rhythm of shared work and stolen moments. During the day, they attended to their separate responsibilities, Dawson managing the ranch, Zephyrine caring for patients and expanding her garden. In the evenings, they planned their future together, discussing everything from adding rooms to the main house to possibly starting a small school for the children of neighboring ranches. I want to build something that lasts, Dawson told her one night as they sat by the creek that ran through the property. Not just a successful ranch, but a community, a place where people can be themselves without fear of judgment. A sanctuary, Zephyrine mused, like it was for me. For all of us. Exactly. He squeezed her hand. With you by my side, I think we could make it work. The week before their wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Crooked Y. Zephyrine was in her infirmary, preparing a tincture for one of the ranch hands who suffered from recurring headaches, when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw a smartly dressed older gentleman dismounting from a fine horse. He looked distinctly out of place amid the working ranch, his clothes too formal, his bearing too rigid. Something about him stirred a memory, but she couldn't quite place it. Curious, she stepped outside just as Dawson approached the stranger. "Can I help you, sir?" Dawson asked, his tone polite but wary. The man removed his hat, revealing silver hair and features that were hauntingly familiar. "I'm looking for Dawson Yates," he said, his voice carrying the distinct drawl of Texas. "You found him," Dawson replied, tension evident in his stance. "What's your business here?" The man hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "My name is William Yates. I believe you're my son." Zephyrine's breath caught. Dawson's father, the cruel man who had driven him away all those years ago. She moved quickly to Dawson's side, slipping her hand into his. She felt him stiffen, then relax slightly at her touch. "I know who you are," Dawson said coolly. "The question remains, what are you doing on my land?" William Yates looked older than his years, his face lined with what might have been regret. "I've been searching for you for some time. When I heard about a Dawson Yates running the Crooked Y Ranch in Colorado Territory, I hoped." "Hoped what?" Dawson's voice was hard. "That all would be forgiven, that we could play happy families after 20 years of silence. I hoped I might have the chance to apologize before I die," the older man said quietly. Zephyrine felt Dawson's hand tighten around hers. "I'm dying, son," William continued. "Consumption. Doctors give me less than a year. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I couldn't go to my grave without at least trying to make amends." Dawson's expression remained impassive, but Zephyrine could feel the turmoil radiating from him. "You should leave," he said finally. "Whatever peace you're seeking, you won't find it here." William nodded as if he had expected this response. "I understand, but I'll be staying in Pueblo for the next week at the Western Hotel if you change your mind." His gaze shifted to Zephyrine, noting their clasped hands and the ring on her finger. "I see you found happiness. I'm glad." As he turned to leave, Zephyrine spoke up. "Mr. Yates, I'm a healer. If you're truly ill, I might be able to help ease your symptoms, even if I can't cure the disease." Both men looked at her in surprise. "That's kind of you, miss, but," William began. "My fiancé is being polite," Dawson interrupted. "But we have nothing to offer you here." The older man's eyes widened at the word fiancé, but he merely nodded, replaced his hat, and mounted his horse. "The offer stands, Dawson. 1 week." They watched in silence as he rode away. Once he was out of sight, Dawson dropped Zephyrine's hand and strode toward the corral, his back rigid with anger and pain. Zephyrine gave him space, understanding he needed time to process the unexpected confrontation. It wasn't until after supper, which Dawson had skipped, that she went looking for him. She found him in the barn, methodically grooming his favorite horse, his movements precise and controlled. "You want to talk about it?" she asked softly. "There's nothing to say," he replied, not looking at her. "He's dying and wants absolution. I can't give him that. Can't or won't." Dawson's hand stilled. "Does it matter? The result is the same." Zephyrine moved closer, careful not to crowd him. "It matters to you, or you wouldn't be out here trying to work off your anger." "I'm not angry," he said automatically, then sighed. "That's not true. I'm furious. How dare he show up now after all these years? Acting as if a deathbed apology can erase what he did." "It can't," she agreed. "Nothing can change the past, but maybe this isn't about erasing it. Maybe it's about finding a way to live with it." Dawson finally looked at her, his eyes shadowed with old pain. "I've been living with it just fine." "Have you?" she asked gently. "Or have you been carrying it with you, letting it shape everything you do?" He frowned. "What do you mean, this place?" She gestured around them. "The Crooked Y. A sanctuary for the different, the unwanted, the exiled. It's beautiful, Dawson, what you've built here, but it was born from pain. From rejection. So maybe this is a chance to let some of that pain go, not for his sake, but for yours." Dawson shook his head. "You don't understand what he was like." "No, I don't," she acknowledged. "And I'm not saying you should forgive him or welcome him with open arms. But seeing him, hearing what he has to say might give you something you need." "The only thing I need is you," Dawson said, reaching for her. "You and this life we're building together." Zephyrine went willingly into his embrace, feeling his heart beat steady and strong against her cheek. "I'll support whatever decision you make," she promised. "Just make sure it's one you can live with." The next morning, Zephyrine woke to find Dawson already dressed and sitting on the edge of her bed. Propriety dictated they sleep separately until their wedding, though some nights their talks lasted so late that Dawson dozed in the chair by her stove. "I'm going to Pueblo," he said without preamble, "to see him." Zephyrine sat up, pushing hair from her face. "Do you want me to come with you?" Dawson shook his head. "This is something I need to do alone." He took her hand, tracing the outline of her engagement ring. "But knowing you're here, believing in me, it helps. When will you leave?" "Now." "If I ride hard, I can be there by nightfall, talk to him tomorrow, and be back the day after." He leaned forward to kiss her softly. "Just in time for our wedding." After he departed, Zephyrine threw herself into wedding preparations to keep from worrying. Lai arrived with supplies for the feast, and together they planned the menu. Marcus and Thomas strung lanterns between the trees near the creek, creating an outdoor space for the ceremony and celebration. Pete, in a rare display of sentimentality, presented her with a small wooden box he had carved to hold her medical instruments. "Wedding present," he mumbled, clearly embarrassed by his own gesture. "Figured you could use something pretty to keep your tools in." Zephyrine hugged the gruff old rancher, ignoring his half-hearted protests. "It's beautiful, Pete. Thank you." The night before Dawson was due to return, Zephyrine sat on her cabin porch, gazing at the stars and wondering how his meeting with his father had gone. Would he find the peace she hoped for? Or would old wounds be reopened, tainting what should be the happiest time of their lives? The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her thoughts. It was too late for visitors, and Dawson wasn't expected until morning. Cautiously, she moved back into the shadows of her cabin, reaching for the small pistol Dawson had insisted she keep for protection. Relief flooded her when she recognized Dawson's silhouette, riding hard into the yard. She set aside the gun and hurried to meet him as he dismounted, his face unreadable in the darkness. "Dawson, is everything all right?" Instead of answering, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her hair. She could feel tremors running through his body and realized with shock that he was crying silent, shuddering tears that spoke of profound emotion. Wordlessly, she led him into her cabin, sat him by the stove, and pressed a cup of whiskey into his hands. She waited patiently while he collected himself, offering her presence without demands. Finally, Dawson looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "He's changed," he said simply. "Or maybe he's finally showing who he always was beneath the cruelty." "What happened?" she asked softly. "We talked." "For hours." Dawson took a sip of whiskey. "He admitted everything: the drinking after my mother died, the rage, the way he took it out on me and the workers. Said he spent years trying to make amends, though he knew he could never undo what he'd done." "Do you believe him?" Dawson considered this. "I think I do. He's a dying man with nothing to gain by lying." He set down the cup. "He showed me letters, dozens of them, sent to every territory, every ranch he thought I might have worked at, all returned unopened." "He really was looking for you," Zephyrine murmured, "for 15 years. Dawson shook his head in wonder. "He's sober now, has been since shortly after I left. He sold the ranch, used the money to build a school for Mexican children near the border, named it after my mother." Zephyrine took his hand. "How do you feel about all this?" Confused. Angry still, but differently. Sad for the years wasted. He met her gaze. "But also lighter. Like I've set down something heavy I've been carrying since I was 16. Did you forgive him?" she asked gently. "Not entirely," Dawson admitted. "But I'm starting to understand that forgiveness isn't an all-or-nothing thing. It's a process." He squeezed her hand. "I told him about you, about our wedding. Asked if he wanted to attend." Zephyrine eyes widened in surprise. "What did he say?" "He cried," Dawson said, still sounding bemused by this. "Said he didn't deserve it but would be honored. I told him he could stay here at the ranch, that we have experience with healing and you might be able to ease his symptoms." "Of course," she agreed immediately. "I'd be happy to try." Dawson gazed at her with such love that it took her breath away. "You were right, Zeph. This was something I needed, though I didn't know it. You understand me better than I understand myself sometimes." "That's what partners do," she said simply. "We see each other clearly, especially when we can't see ourselves." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the promise of autumn. Zephyrine stood in her cabin, wearing the dress she had ordered from Denver, simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was loosely pinned, adorned with wildflowers Thomas had gathered that morning. A knock at the door revealed Lai, who had appointed himself her escort for the day. "Beautiful," the cook declared, his eyes twinkling. "Boss won't know what hit him." Zephyrine laughed, nerves and excitement making her giddy. "Is everyone ready, all waiting?" Lai confirmed. "Including Mr. Yates Sr. He arrived an hour ago." Dawson had arranged for a justice of the peace from Pueblo to perform the ceremony. The man, a jolly fellow with a round face and kind eyes, waited beneath an arch of autumn flowers that Marcus and Thomas had constructed. As Zephyrine approached on Lai's arm, her eyes found Dawson standing tall and handsome in a new suit, his face alight with joy when he saw her. Beside him stood William Yates, visibly ill but smiling through tears. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to honor each other's differences, to support each other's dreams, to build a life that welcomed all who needed sanctuary. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the justice declared, beaming at them. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Yates." Dawson's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would share. Around them, their makeshift family erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food and drink flowing freely. Lai had outdone himself with the feast, and Marcus surprised everyone with his skill on the fiddle, providing music for dancing. Even old Pete took a turn around the improvised dance floor with Zephyrine, though he grumbled about it the entire time. As the night deepened and the party showed no signs of ending, Dawson took Zephyrines hand and led her away from the revelry, toward the creek where they had spent so many evenings talking. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I never imagined, when I was walking away from Palisade, that exile would lead me to this, to you, to our home, to all of this. Sometimes the best things in life come from the moments we think are our worst," Dawson mused. "If I hadn't been forced to leave Texas, I never would have built this place, never would have found you." "Then I'm grateful for all of it," Zephyrine said, "even the pain, because it led us here." Later, as they retired to the main house, now their shared home, Dawson carried her over the threshold with a flourish that made her laugh. In the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other fully for the first time, their lovemaking as honest and passionate as everything else between them. Afterward, as Zephyrine lay in the circle of Dawson's arms, watching moonlight spill through the window, she reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought her to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Dawson asked sleepily, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That being exiled was the best thing that ever happened to me," she replied honestly. "And that different truly is exactly what we both needed." Winter came early that year, blanketing the Crooked Y in snow by late October. William Yates, now a permanent resident in a comfortable room in the main house, weakened as the cold deepened. Zephyrine's treatments eased his pain, but couldn't halt the progress of the disease. On a quiet December evening, with snow falling gently outside, he called Dawson and Zephyrine to his bedside. "I didn't expect to find peace before I died," he told them, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've given me that gift, both of you, more than I deserved." "Rest now, Father," Dawson said, the words still sounding strange on his lips but no longer impossible to say. "Save your strength." William smiled faintly. "No need to save it anymore, son. We both know I'm going." He reached for Zephyrine's hand. "Promise me you'll take care of him." "He's stronger than he knows but softer than he lets on." "I promise," she said, tears welling in her eyes for this complicated man who had caused so much pain, but had also, in his own way, helped create the man she loved. William Yates died peacefully in his sleep that night. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath an old oak tree. The funeral was small but dignified, attended by everyone from the Crooked Y and a few neighbors who had come to know and respect the Yateses. As they walked back to the house afterward, Dawson's arm around Zephyrine shoulders, he said quietly, "He left a letter for me. Said he'd written it months ago in case he didn't find me in time." "What did it say?" she asked. "That he was proud of what I'd built here. That he saw in me the best parts of my mother and none of the worst parts of himself." Dawson's voice thickened with emotion. "And that he was leaving his estate, what's left of it, to the Crooked Y to continue providing sanctuary to those who need it." "Oh, Dawson," Zephyrine breathed. "That's a final amends," he finished for her. "One I never expected but am grateful for." He stopped walking to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "I've been thinking about what to do with it. And I want to build a proper clinic," he said, his eyes shining with purpose. "Not just for the ranch, but for anyone who needs healing. A place where you can practice medicine openly, teach others if you want, where different is normal." Zephyrine heart swelled with love and gratitude. "I think that's a wonderful idea." "There's more," Dawson continued. "I've been corresponding with a doctor in Denver, a man my father knew. He believes women should have the same opportunities in medicine as men. He's offered to sponsor you for formal training if you want it." Formal training. Zephyrine could hardly believe what she was hearing. "To become a proper doctor, if that's what you want," Dawson assured her. "The ranch will always be here. We can make arrangements for you to study and still come home regularly." "You would do that for me?" she asked, tears streaming freely now. "Support me in becoming a doctor, even though it means time apart." "I would do anything for you," Dawson said simply. "Your dreams are as important as mine, Zeph. Always." In that moment, standing in the snow with her husband looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world, Zephyrine knew with absolute certainty that being too different had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the Crooked Y. The apple trees Dawson and Zephyrine had planted in the fall burst into bloom, their sweet fragrance filling the air. The clinic, built with William Yates's legacy, stood nearly complete on the edge of the property, accessible both from the ranch and from the main road. Zephyrine divided her time between helping with the ranch, treating patients from neighboring properties, and preparing for her first term of medical training in Denver, scheduled to begin in the autumn. Dawson had arranged for her to study with Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, one of the few female physicians in the country, who was visiting Colorado to establish a women's medical college. Life settled into a rhythm of work and joy, challenges and triumphs shared. The Crooked Y prospered under their joint leadership. Dawson's practical ranching knowledge complemented by Zephyrines' organizational skills and healing abilities. On a warm evening in late May, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set over their land, Zephyrine took Dawson's hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "I have news," she said softly. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Are you certain?" "As certain as my medical knowledge allows," she confirmed with a smile. "We'll welcome a new Yates to the ranch around Christmas time." Dawson's face transformed with wonder and joy. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most delicate glass. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." "The timing isn't ideal with my studies," Zephyrine acknowledged, "but Dr. Blackwell has assured me we can make accommodations. Many of her students are mothers." "Whatever you need," Dawson promised. "Whatever makes this work for both of you." "Both of us," Zephyrine teased. "You're part of this too, you know." "The three of us, then," he amended, kissing her softly. "Our family." Over the following months, the Crooked Y continued to evolve and grow. The clinic opened officially in July, with a celebration that drew people from miles around. Many came out of curiosity, some with skepticism about a female healer, but all were welcomed equally. By autumn, Zephyrine pregnancy was showing, her slender frame now visibly carrying their child. With Dawson's unwavering support, she began her studies in Denver, staying there 3 days a week and returning to the ranch for the remainder. The arrangement was challenging but rewarding. Zephyrine thrived in the academic environment, her practical experience complemented by formal knowledge. Dawson managed the ranch efficiently during her absences, and their reunions were all the sweeter for the brief separations. In December, as the first heavy snows of winter blanketed the ranch, Zephyrine went into labor. The child, impatient like both its parents, arrived more quickly than expected, giving Dawson barely enough time to summon help from the ranch hands. "A son," Zephyrine announced, exhausted but radiant as she placed the squalling infant in Dawson's trembling hands. "Strong and healthy." Dawson stared at the tiny face in wonder. "He's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks. "Perfect." They named him William Marcus Yates, William for the grandfather who had found redemption before his death, Marcus for the loyal friend who had stood beside them from the beginning. The boy had Dawson's dark hair and Zephyrine bright eyes, a physical embodiment of their union. As they had promised at their wedding, the Crooked Y remained a sanctuary. Over the years that followed, it grew to include not only the ranch and clinic but eventually a small school, built when young Will reached learning age and other ranch families expressed interest in education for their children. Zephyrine completed her medical training, becoming one of the first female doctors officially recognized in Colorado territory. Her practice expanded, drawing patients from as far as Denver, who sought her unique combination of traditional medicine and herbal remedies. Dawson's ranching enterprise prospered as well. The Crooked Y cattle were known for their quality, and his breeding program for horses gained recognition throughout the West. But more than their professional accomplishments, the Yateses became known for their open home and hearts, welcoming those who, like them, had been deemed too different by conventional society. 5 years after Will's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Lily Rose, named for Lai, who had become like family, and for the wildflowers that had decorated their wedding. 2 years later, twins James and Thomas joined the family, completing their household with joyful chaos. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Dawson surprised Zephyrine with a trip back to Palisade. The town had changed, grown larger, more prosperous, but some things remained the same. Dr. McManus still practiced, though his hair had gone gray and his practice had diminished as younger doctors established themselves in the expanding community. As they walked down the main street, Zephyrine, now Dr. Yates, respected physician and mother of 4, some of the older residents recognized her. Whispers followed them, but they were different now, tinged with respect, even admiration. The woman they had exiled had returned successful, vindicated by time and accomplishment. "Regrets?" Dawson asked quietly as they passed the town council building where her exile had been decreed. "Not one," she replied honestly. "Everything that happened led me to you, to our children, to the life we've built. How could I regret any of it?" They did not stay long in Palisade, just enough time to close that chapter of their lives definitively. As they rode away, back toward their home and family, Zephyrine reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought her here. From a young girl learning medicine at her father's side, to an exiled healer walking alone on a dusty road, to a wife, mother, doctor, and partner in creating a haven for the different. and the dispossessed her life had been remarkable not despite the challenges, but because of them. "What are you thinking?" Dawson asked, just as he had on their wedding night and countless times since. "That different truly was exactly what we both needed," she replied with a smile. "And still is." "Always will be," he agreed, reaching across to take her hand as they rode side by side, heading home to the Crooked Y, the sanctuary they had built together, a place where different wasn't just accepted but celebrated, where exile had led to belonging, and where love had transformed wounds into wisdom. In the years that followed, their legacy grew. The clinic expanded into a small hospital serving the entire region. The school gained recognition for its progressive curriculum that taught both boys and girls equally. The ranch thrived, becoming a model for sustainable practices and fair treatment of workers. Their children grew tall and strong, each with their own dreams and talents. Young Will showed his father's gift with animals and his mother's healing instincts. Lily Rose developed a passion for teaching, eventually taking over the school. The twins, James and Thomas, complemented each other perfectly, James with his head for business, Thomas with his artistic soul. And through it all, Dawson and Zephyrine remained at the center, their love deepening with each passing year, their commitment to each other and to their shared vision unwavering. On warm summer evenings, they still sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, their hands clasped just as they had been that first night when a tired, exiled woman had shared tea with the cowboy who'd rescued her. Different indeed was exactly what they had needed and what had made all the difference.